these trees with a power knapsack spray, a blower. And they, you know what they used to spray it with?
DDT.
Worse than that. Sometimes they did deodorant and everything. So this stuff would wash over the poor little devils. And in that era, until a lady called Rachel, what was her name? Rachel somebody, in 1963 wrote a book called The Silent Spring. And she exposed the danger of poisons and agriculture. And we were all horrified. You know? And suddenly we realised what was happening in the Murray Valley and the Riverina and in Stanthorpe and everywhere else. We had these aerial spraying going on. And I remember even when I had a farm outside Toowoomba in the 1980s, they'd aerial spray crops not far from us. And then when they finished the row, they'd come over our place before they sort of closed the sprayer off, and you get this drift. And one day I came out and my car was parked outside on the pad and it had all this white fleck on it. And it was all the chemical that had come out of when the guy closed the tank off, he'd forgotten to do it until he was over our house. Now that also went over our roof and we were collecting rainwater. So, you know, there was a lot of people put a valve into their rainwater system. So when it rained, the first 10 minutes or 15 minutes of heavy rain, you didn't collect the water, you let it go before you put it in the tank to wash this poison off. But, you know, we had lead in all our paints, and everybody thought that didn't matter that much. It's good paint, lead, and it lasts. It lasts. I remember my first father-in-law was a painter, and he used to say, you know, can't get rid of lead paints because you've got a 15-year life with a lead paint, whereas all these modern ones, like, you know, the one that Rolf Harris drums the tin with, you only put it up and after 4 years in Queensland it starts to peel everywhere. You know, there are all these things that we were doing. We were naive, and today we have grown into a very much tougher environment. And in mid-1970s I took the step. After having joined the Liberal Party, I was a candidate in Queensland, and I became a Member of Parliament of the Queensland Parliament, the Legislative Assembly, in 1974, January, and in 1978 I became a Minister for Welfare and Prisons or Corrective Services, as it's euphemistically known today. And after 3 years of that, or 2.5 years, I became Deputy Leader of the Liberal Party and the coalition with Joe, and I became Attorney General and Justice Minister. Not a lawyer, mind you, an agriculturalist, and scientist and economist, but I was Attorney General of this state for well nigh on 3 years after that. And that was a very, very dramatic time, because I did 120 odd bills, some of them very complicated, but I also was involved in some good stoushes with the old man over a number of issues. And it was, you know, a time when we saw many things happen in this country. But in 1983, the coalition fractured, and the Liberals stepped away from government, and I lost my seat in the ensuing election. I had a city seat on the other side from the University of Queensland along the river, from West End around to Annerley and to Yeronga, if you know that geography. And the seat had a very wafer-thin margin, except in 1974 I won it with a big margin, because that's when there were only 11 Labor members left in a seat of 82, in a parliament of 82. So we got some inflated figures, but it was hard hanging on to that seat, and because of the drama of splitting the coalition, I lost it. Now, after that I went into my next phase of career, which was a company director and consultant, and I worked in many roles. I've been on boards of companies in coal, steel, finance, abattoirs and meat. That's Tees Brothers Holdings. I've been on a variety of boards. I chaired the review of the liquor legislation in this state. I chaired a review of all the drought relief measures in the late 1990s for the state government, and had an interesting committee. And one of those was now Federal Minister Ian Macfarlane from Toowoomba, and we had a major report on all that. And then finally, I chaired a report on the deregulation of the dairy industry, which was in the late 90s, and all that happened in the year 2000 with the deregulation, which say now you buy your milk at $1 a litre in Coles and Woolies, and the dairy farmers all go out of business. But it's an interesting business indeed. But I have worked in a whole range of things. I'm still a company director, and I chair a board in Sydney of a public company that's listed, Fox Symes or FSA Group Limited, and I'm on some private companies as well. And I'm about actually to join a board of we could call it a pro bono board for the Indigenous people in the Cape York area under Noel Pearson, and I'll be joining that board very shortly, and I've given consent verbally, and that's going to be an interesting task, and I've been helping them in a consulting capacity for some time. So it's been a very interesting life. I worked in Canberra a great deal during the Howard years, and I've got to say that you develop a lot of skills over a period of having worked since 1959. I've never not worked. So that's almost, how many years is that? 54 years. And I talk to some young people and I say, I have worked for 54 years continuously, and they can't believe it. And they said, but don't you want to retire? And I say, no, I have no interest in retiring. I'd rather retire in a far more terminal way at the time when it has to happen, and I'd rather keep this operating nicely, and that's the way I view life. I believe retirement is a sure way of vegetating, and the last thing I want to do is vegetate, and so I've had my health scares, as you well know. You've been brought up to date probably in here. I'm a Zipper Club man. But even as a youngster, when I was 12, 13, I had a year in bed with a displaced hip, and they didn't know how to do surgery in those days with pins and things, so they put you in a frame on your back, immobile for months on end, and I was 12 months like that. My legs withered, and then I had to learn how to walk again. I had a caliper for another 12 months. So I went through 2 years of that sort of testing and of character, and made me patient. And actually, despite Sandy's probably other observations that she'd make, I am a very patient individual. I'm volatile, but I'm very patient. I'm very patient. And there's an old saying. I worked with the Americans for a while when in the fertiliser business, and when they started the ammonia plant on the mouth of the river in Brisbane. And I had a boss from New Jersey called Ed Struble, and he'd been in the Korean War and World War II, and he was a real wild sort of individual. And he used to talk about lying in the weeds, like a wounded buffalo, and you wait for your adversary. And you only charge when your adversary is vulnerable. And I've used that principle. I do lie in the weeds, and it's very important to learn to do that, particularly when you learn the lesson of patience. I used to say to my mother, when am I going to get out of this frame? It was not unlike polio, but it was just a physical displacement, thank goodness, not like the muscles weren't affected by disease. And she'd say, you've got to wait. And one day I was doing study of, I think it was like the junior year or intermediate in New South Wales by correspondence, and I said to her, I'm fed up with this study. And she said, good. She said, I'll take the books,